We respect very much Canada's independent judiciary. However, we do not agree with this decision.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Canadians around the country celebrated today as it was reported that a federal court ruled the Emergencies Act that was activated by Justin Trudeau during the Freedom Convoy was unjustified and unreasonable. Joining us today is our good friend Vesper, who also wanted to celebrate as well as share his unique perspective as a marketing expert.
Hey everyone.
Hey,
Thank
Vesper.
you so much thanks for having me, Fox and Cypher. This is a blast. Can't wait, and I'm jubilating.
I think Canadians everywhere are happy about this.
Yeah, it was definitely a surprise. I was working today. Fox was like waving me, as I was on a call, and she just sent me the link, and I was like, holy crap. I couldn't react at all because I was literally, on camera, in a meeting. So I had to be completely stone-faced. But inside my head, I was like, uh-oh, this is not going to go well for the Liberals.
I got up and started doing the rain dance.
One thing that we found interesting was the way the media outlets reported it on the headlines. So here's one by CBC. And another one by National Post, CTV News, and the Western Standard. It's very different vibes from all of them.
Yeah, the more left-leaning was a little bit more, stoic about it. And the more right-leaning media outlets were, I would say, a little bit more blunt, especially the Western Standard. Literally says, Federal Court declares War Measures Act usage against Freedom Convoy wrong. Right, so they didn't mince any words with that, and what's to be expected by the liberal funded media, right? So
not much.
As a marketing expert, what do you notice about those headlines?
Honestly, this is called deflection. The whole idea is damage control and deflection, and unfortunately, no matter how you frame this at this point, it's the word unjustified, not justified. These are all negative connotations that really are very hard to come back from. It implies, if you take it further, that the government uses unjustifiable means to exact their measures.
Indeed. And that's what a lot of people have been saying and screaming at the top of their lungs for the last year or two, right? So let's get into the moment. And oh, what a wonderful and sweet moment that is, where Chrystia Freeland had to announce to the world that the justice system had ruled against their government again.
So we are aware of the court decision. We have discussed it with the Prime Minister, with cabinet colleagues, with senior federal government officials and experts. We respect very much Canada's independent judiciary. However, we do not agree with this decision, and respectfully, we will be appealing it.
Tell me she's not nervous as all hell, and tell me that was not scripted. It obviously was scripted.
Yeah, it was completely scripted, and there's a reason why the diapace and in the way that you speak from a PR perspective, measuring your words and taking long pauses is to give off the idea that you are taking this in a very grave way, but it's also very sombering for her personally and the government. I mean, what are they going to say? This is the federal government. This isn't a provincial one.
Well, and the other problem is they've tried to rely on the judicial system to justify a lot of what they've done over their tenure. And now that same judicial system is essentially calling them out and saying, no, this is wrong. And this is not the first law or piece of legislation that the court has ended up ruling against the government.
Well, you know what I find funny is what Pierre Poilievre said. He said the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act was unnecessary from the start,
right,
and caused this crisis by dividing people. He proceeded to violate charter rights to illegally suppress Canadian citizens.
Well, and this may not have even been necessary if the government actually just sat down and had a bit of a dialogue with some of these people. That's all that was needed.
But the government thought that they were right and that the protesters were wrong, and that was the end of it. And that if they wouldn't leave, they would make them leave.
So let's listen to it a little bit more.
I would just like to take a moment to remind Canadians of how serious the situation was in our country when we took that decision. The public safety of Canadians was under threat. Our national security, which includes our national economic security, was under threat. It was a hard decision to take. We took it very seriously after a lot of hard work, after a lot of careful deliberation. We were convinced at the time, I was convinced at the time, it was the right thing to do. It was the necessary thing to do. I remain, and we remain, convinced of that.
Yeah. Sorry. I don't buy that. Canadians don't buy that. Canadian public safety was not under threat. It has to be a national security threat. That's one of the criteria that we'll get into later, but it has to be a national security threat.
Well, the people on Parliament Hill felt threatened because they had Canadians who were rising up and questioning their authority and questioning their policies, and they didn't like that.
No, and I remember seeing this unfold, and I remember seeing the reports of the Ambassador Bridge and the blockade there, and that was causing a risk to trade and everything like that. But there was other means of getting across. They were jammed, I know. But you can't use that justification. Oh, a national economic threat. Okay, well then.
But it was actually proven. It was actually proven that the economy was in no danger.
Well,
right?
but I'm just thinking, use that justification. Then why didn't you declare the Emergencies Act when COVID hit? Because that was much more of a national security threat to the economy than some truckers on a bridge.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, this is all narrative driven, right? I mean, if you own the media, you dictate the narrative. The PR team dictates the narrative to the media. And if you want people to look at one thing instead of another thing, this is what sleight of hand is. This is what the government has been engaging in for 3 years, sleight of hand.
Well, and I think the fact that these protesters were there, they couldn't deal with them, and they were refusing to leave, and it was garnering more and more and more international attention
and support.
I think it just got to the point where they said we have to get them out of here. We have to get them out of here. Otherwise, all of Canada is going to be rising up against us, and this is going to be a really bad situation for us. And the government could have fell if they let that go. But you know what? That's democracy, folks. Like, just because more and more people are joining a protest does not give you the right to arrest protesters. Look what's going on right now across the country, daily, with protests. Threats of violence. I don't see any bank accounts seized. I don't see any people being arrested. What we're going to do now is we're going to briefly touch on some things that Canadians may not be aware of.
So the decision was made by a Canadian federal court. So where does that fit in?
So this is Canada's court system in a nutshell. And I think some people earlier were confused whether this was a Supreme Court ruling or a federal court ruling. So this was actually a federal court ruling. And where does the federal court fit in? Well, you have essentially two different types of courts that are in Canada. You have superior courts and you have federal courts. We won't worry about the tax courts. The superior courts, that's where your criminal charges come from. So that's where, your murder trials are, your theft trials, traffic tickets, that sort of thing. Federal court, that's where all your civil cases go, and disputes of laws and that sort of thing. So that's where this case was actually brought to, was the Canada Federal Court. Now, Freeland had said that they're going to be appealing this. So what that will do is that will go to the Federal Court of Appeal. And if the Federal Court of Appeal agrees with the ruling of Judge Mosley, then the Liberals would have the option to appeal again. And at that point, it would go to the Supreme Court of Canada, assuming it doesn't go to any other Federal Court of Appeals. And then that's it. Once the Supreme Court rules on it, that's the end of it. But that's going to take a long time, right? So it'll be interesting to see, how much of our taxpayer money that the court is going to be spending on this, because it'll be government paid lawyers that are paid with our tax money to appeal this specific decision. So that's going to be something that is going to be worth watching.
Now, you know us, we wanted to get our hands on the actual decision by the judge, and here it is.
So this is it. So it's dated Ontario, January 23rd, 2024. So it's literally hot off the press. And this decision was rendered by the Honorable Mr. Justice Mosley. And it was between the Canadian Frontline Nurses and Kristen Nagel and the Attorney General of Canada, and between the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and, again, the Attorney General of Canada. So these are the two parties that actually brought this forward. And two of the parties within here, they actually did have their bank accounts frozen. So they were actually important to be representing those parties in this case, where the government just froze their money and took it. In this ruling, the judge was evaluating the use of the Emergencies Act based on essentially four main questions. And I've highlighted them here. Was the decision to issue the proclamation unreasonable and ultra vires the act? So what that means is, did the act go beyond the scope of power in a reasonable way? So, essentially, did the government exceed their mandate in invoking the act? The next one is, was the, quote, threats to the security of Canada, quote, threshold met? Was there evidence of threats or use of acts of serious violence? And did the regulations and economic order violate the Canadian Bill of Rights? Those are the four main questions that the judge rendered in this. And the decision is over 126 pages.
The ruling's far too detailed to go into in this video, but we do want to direct your attention to page 123, which is Judge Mosley's conclusion.
This is essentially the conclusion. And what Judge Mosley says, which is interesting, just before this part, is he says that when he began this process, he thought that he was going to end up ruling that the Emergencies Act was reasonable because, again, of all the media attention it got on, that was pervasive throughout Canada, was in everybody's face. This was bad. This is going to be the end of the economy, all of this sort of thing. But I'll just read the last pieces of his conclusion here. So section 371, my preliminary review of the reasonableness of the decision may have prevailed following the hearing due to excellent advocacy on the part of the counsel for the Attorney General of Canada, had I not taken the time to carefully deliberate about the evidence and submissions, particularly those of the CCLA and CCF. Those are the two parties I talked about before. And briefly to unpack what he's saying there is he's saying that the Attorney General of Canada did a really good job at advocating the case. But what really swayed his mind was the evidence presented by the two parties that were bringing this lawsuit forward. Their participation in these proceedings has demonstrated again the value of public interest litigants, especially in presenting informed legal argument. This case may not have turned out the way it has without their involvement, as the private interest litigants were not as capable of marshalling the evidence and argument in support of their applications. So basically, he's saying these two parties were much better equipped to actually argue the case than was, at the Emergencies Act inquiry that everybody saw. So moving on, 372, I have concluded that the decision to issue the proclamation does not bear the hallmarks of reasonableness, justification, transparency, and intelligibility, and was not justified in relation to the relevant factual and legal constraints that were required to be taken into consideration. In my view, there can be only one reasonable interpretation of EA sections 3 and 17 and paragraph 2C of the CSIS Act, and the applicants have established that the legal constraints on the discretion of the GIC, that's the government of Canada, to declare a public order emergency were not satisfied. So this is interesting. This is a judge that entered into this case thinking, okay, I'll hear all the evidence, but I doubt it's going to change my mind based on what I see. And he reviewed the evidence, which was presented in totality, because it wasn't allowed to be presented in totality in the Rouleau report, but they were able to present all of the evidence, and it overwhelmingly displayed that, you know what, it wasn't justified. It didn't meet the threshold. The whole point of the Emergencies Act is there's a catastrophe going on. Like, that's what we're talking about, a literal catastrophe.
Well, Trudeau seemed to think that Canadians standing up for themselves against him and his government was a catastrophe.
Well, that's the thing. A political catastrophe doesn't count, Justin.
The fact that many things were conglomerating at the same time, was what brought this to bear. There was a sense of rush that ran through the entire government. And a lot of things were being said that were, just allegations of people making fires, people waving swastikas. It was just a bunch of flair that was happening all around. They were trying to create the narrative in front of what eventually would lead, they knew down the road, a legal battle that they were not going to win. And it just shows the incompetence of this government in the first place, that they're basically stating all these things as though they're going to convince Canadians. And then finally, when everything's settled, the federal court is reviewing all the evidence and coming to this conclusion. The Honorable Mr. Mosley, he just looked at this and said, this does not warrant what you guys executed, essentially, which was the Emergencies Act. This has to be a national threat. This particular legislation was for national threat, usually wartime. And you did this because it was politically convenient. In fact, in the Emergencies Act, one of the people that spoke said that this was a convenient move to quell a political faction of the Canadian citizenry. So it's even in the Inquiries Act.
Well, and the other interesting thing is, I believe the Ambassador Bridge blockade had been resolved before they actually passed the Emergencies Act, if memory serves correctly. So I believe that, the main focus of their justification for an economic threat, this economic security threat that Freeland is talking about, was resolved. So there's no leg to stand on here. And the other thing that Judge Mosley says is, the Attorney General argued that this was a critical situation, and this needed to be taken seriously, and Judge Mosley says, yes, it was a critical situation. 100% it was. But a critical situation does not equate to a national security threat.
No, this was just a political inconvenience for Trudeau, because remember that the people that were on the front lines of the Freedom Convoy, when they had come, They didn't come with weapons. They didn't come with anything.
They came with coffee.
Right. They came to talk. They came to literally talk. They were very close to being able to talk to somebody from the federal government. And then at the last moment, the Ottawa mayor chimed in and canceled those talks. Tamara Lich is on record saying, we will not stay a second, a day longer. Let us talk about what you are exacting in terms of lockdown measures for travel. This is why we're here. We're not here to stay, but man, talk to us. And they're not talking to them. Trudeau, this would make him look weak. And so rather than him coming out and saying, okay, I went maybe a bit too far with all my mandates. Nope, I'm going to leave the country or leave the situation, and we're going to cut any ties, and we're going to make up this narrative that they're trying to overthrow the government. So let me get this straight, Trudeau. You negotiating with your citizens about what they feel is perhaps a heavy hand overthrowing the government? This is what you thought? And that's what you peddled for 3 years? No wonder that this is this ugly. And I'm rejoicing over his incompetence, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. Like, this is just a terrible, terrible move.
And you know, if I may add, I'm sorry to say this, Cypher, if only people knew how many premiers, because within the same document that I'm sure you're going to put a link to, because you guys cite everything,
Absolutely.
which is what I love about Northern Perspective. If you go to page 184, you will literally see, and wait, 185, all the first ministers and their views. So Ontario supported this. Newfoundland didn't support this. British Columbia said that the provinces supported the use of this. So all these like liberal stronghold areas were in support of it. Quebec, which I found fascinating, did not support this, the EA.
So here's the page that we're talking about. Premier of Ontario said he supports federal government's decision. Premier Newfoundland and Labrador says he supports invoking the Emergencies Act on a time-limited basis. BC...
I'm honestly not surprised that Ford would say that he supported it. Like, that's just awful. And I'm not surprised either.
Yeah, Premier of
and this is the same guy that said Trudeau shouldn't be prime minister. He couldn't even be a floor sweeper. So for him to say this is very expedient.
Premier Saskatchewan issued the following tweet. The illegal blockades must end, but police already have sufficient tools to enforce the law and clear the blockades, as they did over the weekend in Windsor.
There you go.
Premier of Alberta tweeted that Alberta's government is opposed to the invocation of the Emergencies Act, arguing that Alberta has all the legal tools and operational resources required to maintain order. He also expressed concern that the invocation of the Emergencies Act could escalate a tense situation. So, like, this is the thing. They were using the Emergencies Act to really, well, let me back up. They were using the border crossing bridges, the ones that were blockaded, as the real justification for the Emergencies Act. But the areas that we're talking about this, we're saying it's already dealt with, and we have the resources. There's no need for it.
Even the Ottawa police chief had said. And at that time, who was the police, the RCMP head? I forget her name. Even she had said that we have enough resources, but it's like, no, Mendocino wanted to hammer this through. Trudeau wanted to hammer this through. It needs to be dealt with when 2/3 of the premiers of Canada were saying, no, there was no reason to do this.
Well, let's get real. Everybody knows that Trudeau wasn't focused on the border crossings. He was focused on his front lawn.
Yeah.
That's why he brought this in.
100%.
So anything else other than that is just lip service. It's just noise. It's just distraction. And if those border crossings hadn't been blocked, he still would have found a way. He would have tried to use it to clear the people off of the front lawn. That's what he would have done.
Did you guys know that even sections of this from the Queen's Privy Council are redacted?
So, ladies and gentlemen, Trudeau's transparent government.
No, that's not a printing error.
No.
What is that, guys?
This is a redaction, and it's been classified as secret by the Privy Council. Here's more, and more, and more. Now, this is from the most transparent government ever. Remember, that was one of Trudeau's promises. But here's the thing: we actually have a bit of a treat for everybody later this week. We are going to be speaking with a lawyer who's been on the show before, and we've asked them to take a look at the ruling, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to get a lawyer's opinion on the ruling. So that's going to be a special episode of Northern Perspective that we are hopefully going to deliver to you on Thursday night. So stay tuned for that, everybody.
So shortly after Freeland made her announcement, it was question time from the reporters.
The decision seems to single out some of your choices on freezing bank accounts and credit cards as being part of the reason where it's unreasonable in terms of the measures taken by the government. You defended those when you announced them at the time. Do you have any regrets on taking that measure in the light of this decision? Would you have done it differently based on what we've seen from the federal court today?
As I said in my opening remarks, we faced, as a country and as a government, an incredibly serious threat. A threat to the public safety of many Canadians, a threat to our national security, including our national economic security. We acted to secure and protect Canada and to secure and protect the national interest. It was not an easy time. These were not easy decisions. In making our decisions and choosing to act, we worked very, very hard with all levels of government, and we were very mindful of acting in such a way that the safety, the physical safety of all Canadians involved would be preserved.
I don't know about you guys, but that just turns my stomach listening to her say that.
Yeah, I don't know why we're even playing it. Listening to her constantly say the national crisis, no, this was not a national crisis. Are you kidding? I had never seen Canadians so unified ever before.
I'm not surprised that she would double down right now. I am, however, disgusted.
Well, and I know people say in the comments that you can't stand listening to Freeland, but here's the thing. It's important that you do. It's important that you know what she's saying. It's important that you know what the liberal narrative is. Because if you don't, then you're uninformed. And when you're having conversations with those liberals, you need to understand where they're getting this from. So as difficult as it is to listen to, and believe me, we have to listen to a lot more than you do.
Yeah, we cut out a lot for you guys.
Yeah.
So
it's important. It's important to know what they're saying. So I implore you to at least try to tolerate it. If you can't tolerate it, then skip past it. But it is important to know what she's saying, because it's in direct opposition to what Judge Mosley is saying. He's saying there was no threat. She's saying there is a threat to public safety. Where? How? Like, if you actually look at some of the real video from the trucker convoy, you'll see they're dancing, they're playing games, like they're singing songs, they're talking. That it was probably the least violent protest in the history of Canada, and that includes the 60s. So it's completely fabricated, and it's gaslighting. And this is the hill that obviously they've chosen to die on. And they may in fact die on it. Who knows? But lastly, we do have a treat for all of our fans that are not fans of champagne. He was questioned by CTV News host Vashi Kapelos.
You were around the cabinet table when that decision was made.
I was.
Did you support the invocation of the act at the time, and do you regret it now after seeing this decision?
So, first of all, let me bring back where we were at the time. You know, this was at the time of unprecedented uncertainties in the country. We had to restore law and order. And I want to bring back the viewers, those who were there. Just remember, like, the bridge that were closed, the street that were closed in Ottawa. I certainly believe we did the right thing. Now, I know the government is going to appeal. My colleagues have talked about the ins and out of that. But I really want, you know, it's always easy to comment after the fact, but let's bring back where we were as Canadians. And our primary responsibility was to restore, health and safety for Canadians, and certainly order. And I remember, for example, think about Windsor. Think about the bridge that were closed and the impact on the economy we had. So we took the measures that were required at the time. And obviously, we'll let the court process goes on. But I would say, as a member of cabinet, we took the right decision at the right time to protect the interest of Canadians.
What will you say, or what would you say to Canadians watching tonight who will see the outcome of this decision and think to themselves, I'm concerned that if I'm on the opposite side of a political or ideological issue with the government, that they will infringe on my rights and freedoms or play fast and loose with the law to advocate their own position over mine? How would you
Listen, the first
respond to
thing I
that
would say-
Great question.
Well, I find it interesting that Champagne said, oh, you know, the border was blocked in Windsor and blah, 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 and that's what we took into account. We just read how it was unblocked by the time that they invoked the Emergencies Act.
Yeah. Yeah. It was Ottawa. Guess what, Ottawa? You are not the entire country, contrary to your popular belief.
I thought it was Toronto that thought that they were the entire country.
Well, apparently Ottawa wins the prize. They are the new king of thinking they are the center of Canada. But you are not the country. Just because you have a big protest does not mean that you get to invoke the Emergencies Act and say that the entire country has a national security threat against it.
Yeah, it's, just to add, it's also kind of funny that the same prime minister who advocated for BLM and all these other
The riots
and the fact that there are people that are oppressed and all these things, that they have a voice, they have a right to protest. And the idea that people came right to his front yard, to Parliament, is exactly what made him look really bad on the world stage. And what I think happened at that moment is that he recognized that there's an incongruence here. On one hand, I am promoting the message that people, Canadians, have a right to speak their minds. He said this in several videos, even on my Twitter channel, X channel. I've showed how many times he said that. The irony behind all this is when Canadians finally come with bouncy castles, salt of the earth people, no violence, no sticks, no weapons, nothing, to Ottawa to talk, you then shut them down and beat them with horses and bring in like RCMP and backup forces from probably God knows where, and you exact violence on them to get them out. They wanted to talk to you. You were unwilling to talk to them. And instead of talking to them, you chose plan B. Let's go full violence at this point.
But that's the classic leftist strategy, isn't it? It's, if you don't agree with me, I will shut you down however I can.
You are allowed to do whatever you want as long as I agree with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're completely right. This has happened in Cuba. This happens in China. This happens in every country that espouses socialist views. It is an unfortunate thing that Trudeau didn't consider the state of his constituents, the state of his brand. If I were a liberal, you may have had yes, maybe honking and so on and so forth, but what he did and what this now brings in terms of brand damage to the liberals, every liberal should feel ashamed that this is what their government did. No matter how they could rationalize it or justify it, you used violence against people. No one attacked anyone in Ottawa. This was perturbing to see the imagery. It went worldwide. Are you kidding? The whole world saw this and mocked our prime minister. We're an embarrassment.
Oh yeah,
quite frankly.
Yeah, the world was shocked at the measures that Canada took here. No Western democracy had ever taken measures like this ever before. To enact basically the Wartime Act when a war is not going on in order to suppress a protest of its citizens.
I mean, let me ask a question to you, Fox. What would have been the harm in him? Okay, maybe not necessarily the prime minister, but sending some MP out to have a discussion with these people. What would have been the harm in doing this? Is it because they knew that there was nothing backing their science? There was nothing backing their mandates?
Well, and I mean, I suppose it depends on what you mean by harm. If you mean like what's the actual harm, there's nothing. There's no harm in having discourse. But what the real harm is what you said, that they would discover that their measures were unnecessary, that their theories held no water, and that they were just doing all these things like, you know, the mask mandates, the vaccine mandates, locking people in their own homes, shuttering businesses, that they were destroying the country for no reason.
They say they had a reason.
Right. I think what this protest did is it held up a mirror to the Liberals that said, look at yourself, and did you make the right choice? And they didn't like that.
Well, the other thing that this protest did is it showed the Liberals that it's not just a very, very small fraction of Canadians that are unhappy with this. It is actually a very large number of Canadians, and a large number of people. This is what the Liberals love to forget. A large number of people in that convoy were vaccinated. So you have people that were actually complying with the mandates, but they didn't agree with them, and they supported the convoy's goal of removing the mandates, that COVID was over.
Yeah, and you know, the best proof of that is in the funding that they had received through, at that time, Give, Send, Go. No MP, no parliamentarian, no party within 2 weeks has ever collected $20 million. Then they said this was Russian influenced or this was American influenced. Come to find out that it was 88% Canadian influenced. This makes them look even worse. And then to lock all this money down because they knew their narrative is not working. They're stuck in Ontario. They want this gone. We have the infrastructure to clear this. No, let's enact a Wartime Measures Act. How foolish. How absolutely foolish.
Well, and I haven't heard it said a lot, but really what they declared was martial law.
Yeah, essentially it is martial law. You're correct.
And, you know, I think people are afraid to say that because you only really hear that in totalitarian countries. Well,
and that's the thing. You don't want to think that your own government, the Canadian government,
would ever do that. Yeah,
is doing this to your fellow citizens and to you.
I mean, why should we think that, right, Fox and Cypher? Canada's, when I used to travel, and I've traveled extensively around the world, my passport was like a badge of honor that I was Canadian, because I was always, oh, you're nice people. You know, you guys are people that help other countries. People can come to you and find refuge. In fact, I left my country of Lebanon to come here because of the state of decay that was going on in our country with a war-torn government, people that were going bankrupt because of corruption. When we came to Canada, we were helped. We were helped by Canadians, not just the government, by Canadians. And it might be interesting to note that we came under a conservative government. But the idea is that Canada had this reputation of being nice, so much so that even South Park would make fun of us for how nice we were.
Well, and you even had other countries teaching their travelers how to dress and act Canadian in order to get better treatment when traveling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember being a teenager and I went on a school trip to France and they told us, make sure you have a maple leaf on your coat so that people will know you're Canadian and not from like America.
Yeah, but that's not just that. I got a story where I was in Germany and Germans were literally putting a maple leaf on their coats or on their jackets. Imagine, even though they were Germans, they would wear the maple leaf, and it would kind of like I don't know, bring about an appearance of like being very nice and sincere. This is what Trudeau has done is a disgrace.
Absolutely.
To not only the liberals should feel ashamed. And I know that many liberals, backbenchers, particularly old school liberals, are probably fuming, especially after what just came out today with this ruling.
Yeah,
and it could not have come out at a worse time during their cabinet retreat.
Well, and we know of people like directly tied to the Liberal Party, like friends of my parents, and they've said they want Trudeau to step down so badly and he's not listening, and they're just so disgusted with the way this party has gone and just how the brand has completely fallen apart that they won't be voting in the next election.
Well, and rumor has it that there are going to be, if not already, massive calls for his resignation at this retreat. And and all the opposition parties are crossing their fingers that he stays there. Because if he stays there, this is over. It's over before Parliament begins. It's over before whenever the next election begins. It is over if he is there. They have a little bit more of a shot if there's somebody else. But as we've discussed before, there is no incumbent that is going to step in and turn this party around. They just might do a little better.
And I'm just going to add something here. Trudeau is a done deal. That's it. The issue now is, what is the Liberal plan for a recovery to that brand? There is so much damage control to be done that we're talking, in my estimation, from what I've seen in my experience with companies that have damaged their brands heavily, that it would take sometimes decades to regain any kind of trust. So a while ago, when I was in my youngin' era, I had met an executive out in New York who was kind of helping me learn a little bit about the ropes, about what are some of the signs that I should stay away from companies that are asking to do some kind of branding. And he gave me a list, and I've kept that list in a Word doc, and I go over it from time to time. But these are some key points, and feel free to chime in, either of you, on some of these key points. And these points are for business, but it really is for brand in general. And these are the signs that your brand is dying or is dead. And what the advice that they gave me was, they said, stay away from people. So a good branding, marketing / consulting, advertising company will do its due diligence on the client that's coming to them. Now, if they're an up-and-coming company, there's not really a whole lot to do other than a credit check, maybe find out who they are before you start working with them, check their social media, see what they stand for. But in this particular instance, we're talking about a brand that's already established and is basically on the ropes. And so what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to assess the 3 last quarters of their basically workings, their earnings, their communications, to see if it's salvageable. So point number 1 is you begin to ask yourself, is your new product or service failing? If it's a continuation of a recent pattern or not just a one-off. So we're looking for pattern. Are you making mistakes with your brand?
So let's replace product with new legislation or new program or new initiative for the
precisely.
Well, and that's the thing. The government shouldn't be doing things like pushing EVs or pushing a carbon tax. What the goal of any political party is to get elected again. And if you're going to piss off your voter base by doing all these things, you can't just be like, oh, well, it's for your own good. We're going to do it anyways. No, you're upsetting your voter base by doing all these things. So how do you expect to get reelected?
So this list is actually an augmentation of severity. It's written from 1 to 26 in severity as it escalates. You're supposed to see where they stop. So the interesting part is, because I didn't continue that point, was so your new product or service failed. If that's a continuation of a recent pattern and not just a one-off, then you've either disconnected with your audience, which is what they've done, the liberals, or failed to hold their attention or have been superseded. Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
There you go.
Number 2 is, are customers leaving? Which is,
Or
is your
voters
base-
leaving, yeah.
That's the polling that can show.
Or have you not noticed, or do you not care? That should be the second question. You don't say this to the client.
Right.
You say this to yourself. You're getting more and more questions about the value that you add. So that's something that we're seeing. They're being grilled now by liberal media constantly about what is the value of what you're having to add at this point. And what do they come up with recently, Cypher? Dental care? I don't know, like tissue paper care?
Yeah. Crap.
I don't know.
Tampons in the restrooms.
Right. Number 4 would be, you keep diversifying in the hope of attracting more business or more people, but all you're really doing is just piling on more cost. So people that misspend or misallocate their cost spending, and you notice that they've expanded, let's say, newer departments or newer whatever, but they haven't really been effective in reaching their audience, you begin to see that these people are wasters of money. You can't really help them because they don't know how to manage their money. Number 5, which is, I find, usually it stops here for me with people. This is where I tell them, sorry, can't do business.
You're
Will not
done.
do business with you. Is you don't have a story. They no longer have a story. This is why everyone notices they keep rehashing the same divisive topics, because there is no more story. Their story has been exposed as a fraud, right? Their idea of transparency, hope, rejuvenation, all this stuff, that was their story in 2015. It's since been exposed as a total phony. So now what's the story? If it were me being hired instead of Max Valaket, I would have said, listen, unless you pay me like $100 billion, I am not, there's no way to help you at this point. You have no story. There's no story to you.
So here's the question: is the best way, and this is what they need to be asking themselves, is the best way to salvage the liberal brand is to accept that it's died in common election?
Yes. And the truth, it's so counterproductive. Most people, when they're wrong, they're reluctant. This is just humans in general are reluctant to admit the truth because it would make them look bad, right? Like I'll probably
that's just
never
people in every walk of life.
But with enterprises or companies, or in this particular case, governments, telling the truth, I mean, the thing is, there's so many scandals you two have uncovered, Cypher and Fox, that to even tell the truth on one of them, like there's no return. You understand? They've painted themselves into such a hole. Had the first scandal come out and they would have said, yes, it was a faux pas, we were sorry, we did wrong, whether it be the We Charity or the SNC-Lavalin, people might have forgiven it. They really might have forgiven it, but it seems like, nope, they have nothing left. To admit the truth to one of them would be basically to say every single thing that we've covered up has basically been a lie.
Yeah, and they are beyond redemption at this point, and this is where the backbenchers really need to step up, in my opinion, because like the longer this liberal government is in power, it doesn't matter if Trudeau steps down. It would just mitigate it. By the time you get to the next election, if it is in the fall of 2025, there's going to be virtually no Liberal Party left.
No, but see, this is the next point. Point 6 was your product is weak, but everyone at your place thinks it's the customers who don't get it.
And there you go. That's their message every day.
Right? They're so in their bubble. They think, why don't you get it? No, you don't get it. your product is weak, but you're not accepting it, or worse, you do accept it, but you're just not going to admit it.
I remember a Canadian company CEO. There was CEO of a company that used to be called CanWest Global, and their stock price had just tanked in a year. It like fell to like a penny stock, and he was interviewed, and he said, investors just are not seeing the value of our company. So it's not his fault. It's the investor's fault.
This is Trudeau in a nutshell.
Exactly.
And you know, I've got to tie this to the other points, and I'll try to go as fast as I can through them, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Number 7, you don't have a growth plan. You just have an existence plan.
A survival plan, yeah.
This is the Liberals. You have number 8. You have a growth plan, but you don't have a business model, or at least one that people are prepared to stick with.
And their business model is running it ad hoc from a podium.
Bravo. Number 9, you're too slow. Number 10, you act without thinking. Number 11, you think without acting.
Well, that's just liberals in general. So
12, and this is essential. I want to pause here and let Fox and you talk about this. You're steadily losing momentum and velocity. You've run out of energy. Everyone feels too tired to keep up the fight.
Oh, yeah. Look, any press conference, look at any of them.
They've aged like 30 years.
Oh, yeah. There is no energy in any of these people. They look like walking corpses.
Well, and there's so much infighting in the caucus itself from what we've heard, that they're just like ripping each other apart.
Yeah, they're saying the same things at press conferences, but behind the scenes, nobody is happy in the Liberal Party. And yeah, they are actively fighting with each other. It's a dog's breakfast behind closed doors when it comes to the Liberal Party, and you just see them. They're exasperated when they come out to talk at a press.
Well, I mean,
conference.
how much can you keep lying?
Right.
For how long can you keep the lying going? It exhausts. You know, we forget that these are humans, right? They do have a soul. I know most people think like, no, they're soulless. No. The human conscience can only take so much, because they have to go to bed. They have to put their head down and say, I lied today.
Well, and the problem
is today.
a lot of these people would have entered into Parliament as an idealist. Finally, I'm going to be able to represent my constituents. I'm going to make my community a better place. I'm going to make my country a better place. Like most people would have entered Parliament like that. And now you're in this position where, to your point, you're going out there and you're asking yourself, how long am I going to have to keep lying to people? I can't do this anymore.
But not only that, you think you're doing the right thing. You go in thinking, I'm going to fix it. These policies that we're going to put in place are going to be great for Canadians. And then the feedback that you get is these policies are awful for Canadians. Why are you doing this? Stop.
I mean, you guys actually had a short that you posted that I loved on X, where this lady was interviewing Trudeau saying people don't like you.
You're not heading for a better year. 7 out of 10 Canadians want you to step down. There was a recent poll saying that Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney were both more popular choices than you to lead the Liberal Party. People are being very clear that they don't like you.
And it's like he's just smiling. 7 out of 10 Canadians don't like you. And I can imagine what it must be like to just keep smiling and be so exhausted.
Yeah,
inside.
that was Mercedes. We did a full interview and breakdown of that. It was hilarious from our end, but you're right. What can it be like sitting in that chair, hearing how everybody hates you and you've done an awful job?
I mean, even the latest UFC debacle, you guys saw that? Like, where everybody was this. Apparently, and I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently his son was there.
Yeah,
Can you imagine hearing if it's true, I can't imagine what it must feel like for his son to hear this.
Well, and that's the thing. And it's not his father's last name. It's his last name, right? And that must, like, he'd probably brush it off and be like, oh, whatever. But, like, his dad is going to be causing him a life of misery.
I mean, listen, just to get back to these points, because I don't want to beleaguer these. The first 12 of these are about you problems. So this is me assessing the client's you problem. Okay. Like, and I'm not telling this to the client. I'm looking at their maneuvers behind the scenes as I study them. Now I begin to assess what is it that's causing these you problems. Number 13 would be that you're in love with trends. You're always looking for the next wave of things. Number 14 is there's an increasing dissonance between what you communicate, where you're willing to tell yourselves you're going, and what your research shows your customers want. So you're starting to see there's a dissonance between your strategy. Number 15 is your ethics worry people. You behave badly or desperately, but even when you're called out, you fail to absorb blame or to acknowledge any level of irresponsibility.
Wow.
So I'm telling you guys, this is a brand catastrophe. Every one of these applies to the Liberals and Trudeau. Number 17, you're less connected with your customers, or in this case, your citizenry, than you used to be, but your competitors are. So, like, that's Pierre again. You're paying, number 18, you're paying too much attention to the wrong metrics. Liberals again, you're looking at all the wrong metrics. 19, you're fading. Your competitors are less intimidated by you and less respectful of you than they used to be. You're being successfully copied and bettered by those who would once have never given a second thought. I'm going to stop on 20. You respond to customers on your terms, not theirs, because you view your customer service as a cost. Number 21, your reputation is dominated by what you can't do, haven't done, won't do, or did badly. Number 22, you're lying to try and win business, and everyone knows that you're doing this. Number 23, there's no consistency in your customer experiences, nor your brand's touch points across media or cultural borders. Number 24, you're caught in an identity crisis. You can't decide who you want as customers. You keep holding on to the market you know, but the market has moved on and you're reluctant to chase a new tribe. Number 25, you're inconsistent or unreliable. No one knows where they are with you. Perhaps there are privacy or confidentiality concerns.
Well, and here's the interesting thing in all of this. The Liberal Party was resuscitated, and they were counting on the name of Trudeau to actually win their first election in 2015. And the irony is it's Trudeau that is going to actually kill the party and put them in, I would say, a not so early grave.